A year where Mick Foley finally got his moment, and the whole world switched channels to see it. When wrestling's most powerful family tore itself apart on national television. When The Rock went from a corporate puppet to the hottest act on TV. When Chris Jericho made his iconic debut. When Stone Cold Steve Austin was the most popular man on the planet. When SmackDown was born. And when, on a spring night in Kansas City, the entire industry stopped and grieved together. 1999 was not the cleanest year in WWF history. It was messy, it was chaotic, but it was alive in a way professional wrestling has rarely been. WCW was crumbling, ECW was running on fumes, but the WWF was absolutely on fire. This was the year they buried the competition, launched a second weekly show, and produced some of the most memorable television in the history of the business. These are the stories that made 1999 the most chaotic year of the Attitude Era. Our story starts in January, but to truly understand the significance of what came next, you need to understand what Mick Foley meant to wrestling fans at the time. He wasn't the most athletic guy in the locker room. He wasn't the best looking. He wore a torn flannel shirt and a dirty sock on his hand. But Mick Foley had something that couldn't be manufactured: the genuine love from the fans. Not because he was the coolest guy on the roster or the most jacked, but because he was one of them. A regular person who'd survived an extraordinary amount of pain without ever losing his humanity. Vince McMahon had been using that love against him all through late 1998. McMahon famously screwed Mankind out of the WWF Championship at Survivor Series by crowning The Rock as the corporate champion. The crowd was livid, Mankind was livid, and the stage was set for one of the most satisfying title wins in company history. It happened on the January 4th episode of Raw is War. The main event was Mankind challenging The Rock for the WWF Championship. With interference from DX and Stone Cold Steve Austin himself, Mankind pinned The Rock to win his first WWF title. But here's where it gets legendary. WCW's Monday Nitro was airing live that same night. A WCW commentator, on orders from Eric Bischoff, went on air and gave away the result of the taped Raw main event so that fans would keep watching Nitro without switching the channel. But what happened next is one of the most famous moments in the Monday Night Wars. An estimated 600,000 viewers immediately switched from Nitro to Raw to watch Foley win the title. Bischoff's attempt to spoil the moment had the exact opposite effect. It handed the WWF a ratings victory and became a symbol of everything WCW was doing wrong. Foley's title reign was short. McMahon forced a rematch at the Royal Rumble where The Rock regained the title. But the feud wasn't finished there. On January 31st, during the Super Bowl halftime, the WWF aired a special empty arena match with Mankind challenging The Rock for the WWF title. Mankind won the title by trapping The Rock with a forklift, but he would lose it back on Raw days later. However, by that point, nobody was laughing at Mick Foley anymore. He had become WWF champion and one of the most beloved figures the company had ever produced. Meanwhile, the rivalry that was truly driving the WWF's resurgence was just hitting its stride. Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock had been circling each other for the better part of a year, and 1999 was where it all came to a head. These were two generational talents at the exact same time. Austin, the beer-drinking working-class anti-hero, and The Rock, the arrogant, electric, trash-talking corporate champion. Everything about them was a contrast, and everything about them was magnetic. Their WrestleMania 15 collision in Philadelphia was the match the first quarter of the year had been building toward. On the road to Mania, Austin gave the corporation a beer bath, and at Mania 15, Austin won his third WWF championship with a stone-cold stunner, and the Philadelphia crowd went home satisfied. But this wasn't the end of the Austin-Rock story. It was barely the beginning. The two would spend the rest of the year, and much of the next, fighting over the soul of the WWF. Every time they shared a ring, something memorable happened, and the audience never, ever looked away. While Austin and The Rock were selling out arenas, the backstage world of the WWF in 1999 was experiencing its biggest power struggle. It started with two separate factions on a collision course. On one side was the corporation, Vince McMahon's army of suits and mercenaries, built to destroy Stone Cold Steve Austin and control the WWF Championship. On the other was the Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness, a cult-like faction draped in black robes and dark symbolism, with the Undertaker operating as a supernatural warlord who wanted something far more dangerous than just a title belt. He wanted the company itself. To break Vince McMahon's will, the Ministry began targeting the one thing he genuinely cared about: his daughter Stephanie. She was kidnapped. Twice. The second time, The Undertaker tied her to his symbol in the ring and attempted to marry her in one of the most genuinely disturbing segments the Attitude Era ever produced. It was Steve Austin, of all people, who crashed through the arena to save her. For one brief, strange week, Austin and McMahon were almost allies. However, that alliance didn't last. On April 29th, the pilot episode of a new show called SmackDown, Shane McMahon dropped the bombshell. He announced that the corporation and the Ministry of Darkness had merged into a single faction, the Corporate Ministry. It was the most powerful stable the WWF had ever assembled, and Shane, not Vince, was running it. He had quietly been consolidating power for months, eventually kicking his own father out of the corporation and telling him the old man he respected was gone. The Corporate Ministry's first act was to book a WWF Championship match at Over the Edge, Austin versus The Undertaker, with Shane as the referee. Commissioner Shawn Michaels countered by forcing Vince to serve as co-referee to keep it honest. But it didn't matter. Shane fast counted a pin, and The Undertaker walked out as WWF champion. The McMahon family civil war was in full swing. But then came the reveal. For weeks, the Corporate Ministry had been referencing a mysterious, higher power, someone even The Undertaker answered to. The identity of this shadowy figure was finally exposed on June 7th. Vince McMahon pulled back his hood and stepped into the light. The whole thing, the ministry, the kidnappings, the merger, had been his scheme from the beginning. Every bit of it designed to destroy Stone Cold Steve Austin once and for all. The crowd booed, Vince cackled, and Austin, standing in the ring, finally understood the full scope of what he was up against. The stable would quietly dissolve by August, but its legacy defined the first half of 1999. However, as the ministry faded into the background, a new power-hungry tyrant was stepping up to the main event, and it was time to play the game. For most of 1998 and early 1999, Triple H was the second most important man in DX. He was talented, ruthless, undeniably good in the ring, but always one step behind the main event. Shawn Michaels was the leader. Austin was the top babyface. The Rock was McMahon's chosen champion. Triple H was hovering just outside the room where it all happened, but 1999 was the year he kicked the door down. At WrestleMania 15, Triple H helped Shane McMahon retain the European Championship against his own DX teammate X-Pac, officially turning heel and joining the corporation. Just like that, the most calculating man in the locker room had made his move. Through the summer, Triple H positioned himself as the most dangerous player in the Corporate Ministry power struggle. He feuded with both Austin and The Rock, losing more often than not, but always finding a way to stay relevant, always finding a way to look credible in defeat. By the time SummerSlam rolled around in August, the company had built a triple threat match for the WWF Championship between Austin, Mankind, and Triple H, with Jesse Ventura as the special guest referee. Mankind won the title that night, but the very next night on Raw, with Shane McMahon's help, Triple H defeated Mankind to capture his first WWF Championship. But the real story of Triple H's 1999 wasn't just the title, it was his marriage to Stephanie McMahon. In the fall, a storyline developed where Triple H had allegedly been stalking Vince's daughter. The angle built toward a wedding between Stephanie and Test in November, a genuine, earnest, fairy tale wedding segment on Raw, but Triple H crashed it. He rolled footage of a Las Vegas drive-thru wedding chapel, where a clearly intoxicated Stephanie had married him weeks earlier. Test was devastated. Vince McMahon was pissed, and Triple H stood at the top of the entrance ramp with the most self-satisfied smile in the history of professional wrestling. At Armageddon in December, Vince challenged Triple H to a no-holds-barred match with the stipulation that if Vince won, the marriage would be annulled. Triple H won, with Stephanie herself handing him the sledgehammer to finish the job, revealing she had been working with Triple H all along, plotting revenge against her father. The McMahon-Helmsley era had officially begun, and it would dominate WWF television well into 2000. In the space of 12 months, Triple H had gone from a supporting act in DX to WWF champion to the most powerful man in the company. But while all of this was happening in the ring, a tragic night in Kansas would bring the entire industry to a screeching halt. There are moments in professional wrestling that exist completely outside the world of storylines and championships. Moments that remind you that behind all the spectacle, there are real human beings doing an extraordinarily dangerous job. May 23rd, 1999, Kansas City. Over the Edge. Owen Hart was one of the most technically gifted wrestlers alive, a man who could get a great match out of virtually anyone, who could make a crowd laugh or cry with equal ease. He was performing that night under the Blue Blazer gimmick, a superhero character that parodied the larger-than-life personalities of the era. His entrance was designed to be spectacular. He would descend from the arena rafters on a harness, mimicking WCW's Sting, before being accidentally dropped into the ring as part of the comedy act. The stunt had been tested before. It had worked before. But as Owen began his descent from approximately 90 feet above the ring, a quick-release latch on his safety harness disengaged prematurely. He fell, and his chest struck one of the ring's padded turnbuckles on impact. Paramedics rushed to him immediately. The television feed had been showing a pre-recorded promo package when it happened, and when the cameras returned live, they quickly cut away. Most people watching at home didn't see it, but everyone in that arena did. Owen Hart was rushed to the hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival. The WWF made the decision to continue the show. It is a decision that has been debated and condemned ever since. The Hart family in particular never forgave it. The fans in the arena weren't told what had happened. Jim Ross had to deliver the news to the television audience mid-broadcast, his voice barely holding together. Wrestlers were visibly shaken. The matches that followed felt like they were happening in a different universe. The next night, Raw ran a tribute show called Raw is Owen. Wrestlers who had been enemies stood side by side and shared their memories. Mark Henry read a poem. Jeff Jarrett, Owen's tag team partner and close friend, spoke through tears. At the end of the broadcast, Steve Austin walked to the ring alone, cracked open 2 cans of beer, drank one, and raised the other toward the Titantron where Owen's photograph was displayed. Professional wrestling lost one of its finest that night in Kansas City. Owen Hart deserved better. A longer career, a bigger spotlight, and an ending that had nothing to do with a stunt gone wrong. His absence left a heart-shaped hole in the industry that was never properly filled, and for one brief, quiet night, the entire WWF stopped performing and simply grieved. Even in the middle of all the chaos and tragedy, 1999 was quietly laying the foundation for the next era of WWF programming. And nowhere was that more visible than on August 9th, when a countdown clock appeared on the Raw is War screen, and a voice started echoing through the arena. Chris Jericho's WWF debut is one of the most electric moments of the entire Attitude Era. He walked out mid-rock promo, interrupting the most electrifying man in sports entertainment at the absolute height of his powers, and held his own from the very first sentence. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or sit in stunned silence. Jericho had arrived from WCW carrying a reputation as one of the best in the world, and within 60 seconds of stepping on a WWF stage, he proved every word of it. Also debuting that year was Kurt Angle, an Olympic gold medalist turned professional wrestler who showed up on Raw in November with intensity, integrity, and intelligence. Within months, it would become clear the WWF had accidentally stumbled onto one of the greatest in-ring performers they would ever sign. And then there was SmackDown. Launched on UPN on April 29th as a Thursday night show, it became the second pillar of WWF's weekly television empire. It gave the company 5 hours of primetime programming every week, doubled the space for storytelling, and within a year became the preferred show for in-ring quality. Meanwhile, WCW was disintegrating in real time. Eric Bischoff was fired in September. Vince Russo, the man largely responsible for writing the WWF's Attitude Era, jumped ship to WCW in October, attempting to transplant the same chaotic energy that had worked in the WWF, but failed spectacularly. Many fans even whispered that Russo was sent as an insider agent by Vince to spy for the WWF and cause WCW to self-destruct from inside. Russo has denied these accusations, but will never know the actual truth. By December 1999, the Monday Night Wars had a clear winner. The WWF hadn't just survived, it had thrived, innovated, and dominated the fight entirely. It had taken the blueprint of 1997 and 1998 and pushed it to its absolute limit. It had built Austin, The Rock, Triple H, Mankind, and Undertaker into legitimate cultural icons. It had launched a new television show, broken pay-per-view records, and done it all in the middle of the most competitive period in wrestling history. 1999 was messy. It was sometimes brilliant and sometimes baffling. But it was the year the WWF became untouchable, and nobody who watched it will ever forget a single moment. And as 1999 came to an end, it was time for the greatest year in WWE history.